Cedar Falls, Iowa sleeps beneath a blanket of morning mist. Manicured lawns stretch like green carpets between white picket fences. The American dream breathes quietly through suburban streets. Nathan Brooks scrubs his weathered pickup, water cascading onto pristine pavement. Then chaos shatters the peace. A woman crashes into view, designer suit shredded, zip ties biting flesh, crimson dripping from her mouth. Terror carves deep lines across her face. Two massive shadows surge forward like wolves scenting blood. Nathan's wrench hits concrete. Marine instincts explode into action. 8 seconds of calculated violence unfold. Bone meets metal. Bodies crumple. Predators scatter. When silence returns, the woman studies Nathan with laser intensity, her chest heaving. "Special forces," she breathes, eyes cataloguing every scar, every precise movement. "Who taught you to neutralize threats like that?" But what she revealed next would obliterate everything Nathan believed about his quiet suburban existence. Nathan's hands trembled as he cut through the zip ties binding the woman's wrists. Blood trickled from shallow cuts where the plastic had bitten deep during her struggle. She winced but didn't cry out, her breathing gradually steadying as the immediate danger passed. The kidnappers' abandoned black sedan sat idling at the corner, driver's door flung wide in their panicked retreat. Nathan's neighborhood felt different now, as if violence had stained the peaceful morning forever. The woman flexed her freed hands, studying Nathan with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "I'm Rachel," she whispered, voice hoarse from screaming. Her designer clothes hung in tatters, but something in her posture spoke of authority, of someone accustomed to being in control. Nathan helped her to her feet, noting how she automatically scanned the street for additional threats. Most civilians would be sobbing or calling for their mothers after an ordeal like this. Instead, Rachel moved with the cautious awareness of someone trained in survival. Her expensive watch caught the morning light, its face cracked but still ticking. "We should call the police," Nathan said, pulling his phone from his pocket. Rachel's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes went wide with something that looked like panic, but beneath it lurked calculation. Nathan had seen that look before, in combat zones where trust was a luxury few could afford. She was weighing her options, deciding how much truth to reveal. The sirens in the distance were growing louder, neighbors beginning to emerge from their homes to investigate the commotion. "Please," Rachel said, her voice carrying an edge of desperation. "I can't go to a hospital. I can't trust anyone right now." She glanced toward his house, then back at his face, as if measuring his character in seconds. Nathan found himself nodding before his rational mind could object. Something about her terror felt genuine, even as other details didn't quite add up. Why would kidnappers target a random woman in Cedar Falls? And why did she seem more afraid of the approaching sirens than she had been of her captors? Rachel's phone buzzed insistently from where it had fallen during the struggle. The screen showed 17 missed calls, but she powered it off without checking the numbers. "They can track this," she explained, though Nathan hadn't asked. Her paranoia felt practiced, like someone who'd been running for a long time. The morning air carried the scent of his neighbor's coffee and fresh-cut grass, but underneath lurked something darker. Nathan made a decision that would change everything, though he couldn't know it yet. "Come inside," he said. "We'll figure this out." The interior of Nathan's modest home told the story of a man trying to hold his life together with duct tape and determination. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, dominated by images of a beautiful woman with kind eyes and an infectious smile. Rachel's gaze lingered on these pictures while Nathan retrieved his first aid kit from the kitchen. The house smelled like coffee and the faint sweetness of pancake syrup, domestic scents that seemed to calm her fractured nerves. A child's artwork covered the refrigerator, crayon drawings of stick figures under smiling suns. "Your wife?" Rachel asked, nodding toward the photographs. Nathan's hand stilled on the bandage he was preparing. The question hung in the air like smoke, carrying weight he hadn't expected to feel. Grace had been gone for 18 months, but the wound still felt fresh some mornings. He'd grown accustomed to the sympathetic looks from neighbors, the careful way people avoided mentioning her name. But Rachel's question carried no pity, just genuine curiosity tinged with something he couldn't identify. "Grace died in a car accident," Nathan said simply, focusing on cleaning Rachel's wounds rather than meeting her eyes. "Drunk driver ran a red light." The words came easier now than they had in the early days, when speaking them felt like swallowing broken glass. Rachel's fingers brushed his hand as he worked, a touch so light he might have imagined it. When he looked up, her expression held understanding rather than the hollow sympathy he'd grown to hate. She knew something about loss, he realized. The knowledge sat in her eyes like old scar tissue. An old film camera sat on the bookshelf, gathering dust in the morning light streaming through lace curtains. Rachel noticed his glance toward it, following his gaze to where Grace's most prized possession waited in patient silence. "She loved photography," Nathan explained, his voice softening despite himself. "Always said she wanted to open her own studio someday." The camera had been Grace's constant companion, documenting every birthday, every small triumph, every ordinary moment that seemed precious only in retrospect. Now it felt like a shrine he couldn't bear to disturb. Rachel stood carefully, testing her balance as the shock began to wear off. She moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the street where police cars were beginning to disperse. Her posture remained coiled, ready for flight at the first sign of danger. Nathan found himself studying her profile, noting the expensive cut of her hair, the quality of her jewelry despite the damaged clothing. Everything about her screamed money and privilege, yet here she stood in his working-class living room, grateful for his protection. What was a woman like this doing in Cedar Falls, and why were professional kidnappers hunting her through suburban Iowa? The sound of a school bus rumbling past made Rachel flinch, and Nathan realized how foreign this world must seem to her. Cedar Falls operated on rhythms she clearly didn't recognize, the predictable patterns of small-town life where everyone knew their neighbors and violence was something that happened on television. Her phone buzzed again from where she'd set it on the counter, and this time Nathan caught a glimpse of the caller ID. The screen showed only "private number," but Rachel's face went pale when she saw it. Whatever was hunting her hadn't given up the chase. Nathan's daughter Mia burst through the front door like a 7-year-old hurricane, backpack trailing behind her and shoes already half off her feet. She stopped dead when she saw Rachel, taking in the bandages and torn clothing with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. Mrs. Peterson from next door appeared in the doorway, her elderly face creased with concern and barely concealed nosiness. The normal rhythms of Nathan's life were reasserting themselves, but Rachel's presence had introduced chaos into the carefully maintained routine he'd built since Grace's death. "Daddy, who's the lady?" Mia asked with characteristic directness. Rachel smiled for the first time since the attack, and the expression transformed her face completely. The fear and calculation melted away, replaced by genuine warmth that reached her eyes. Nathan watched his daughter's face light up in response, recognizing the natural charm that had made Grace so beloved in their community. Something loosened in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Maybe bringing Rachel inside hadn't been such a mistake after all. "This is Rachel," Nathan said carefully, unsure how much truth a 7-year-old could handle. "She had some trouble this morning, so she's going to stay with us for a little while." Mia nodded solemnly, accepting this explanation with the easy adaptability of children. She approached Rachel with the fearless confidence of someone who'd never encountered true evil, offering a crayon drawing she'd made at school. The picture showed a house with two stick figures standing in front, a tall one labeled Daddy and a smaller one labeled Me. The space where a third figure might have stood remained conspicuously empty. Rachel knelt to Mia's level, examining the artwork with the serious attention it deserved. "This is beautiful," she said, and Nathan could tell she meant it. "You're a very talented artist." Mia beamed under the praise, already launching into an explanation of her creative process that involved complex theories about the proper shade of green for grass. Nathan found himself relaxing slightly as he watched the interaction, though questions continued to multiply in the back of his mind. Who was Rachel, really, and what had brought professional killers to his doorstep? Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat from the doorway, her curiosity barely contained behind a facade of neighborly concern. "Everything all right over here, Nathan? I saw all the commotion this morning." Her sharp eyes took in Rachel's appearance, cataloguing every detail for later gossip sessions. Nathan felt Rachel tense beside him, her earlier ease with Mia evaporating as adult scrutiny returned. The woman who'd charmed his daughter with such natural grace was calculating again, measuring threats and escape routes with the paranoid efficiency he was beginning to recognize as habitual. "Just a little misunderstanding," Nathan said smoothly, his protective instincts kicking in despite his own doubts about Rachel's story. "Rachel's an old friend who ran into some car trouble." The lie came easily, surprising him with its completeness. Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows rose fractionally, but she accepted the explanation with the grudging politeness that small-town etiquette demanded. She retreated to her own domain with obvious reluctance, though Nathan suspected they'd be fielding curious visitors for the rest of the day. The morning stretched into afternoon as Rachel gradually relaxed into the rhythm of Nathan's household. She helped Mia with homework, displaying a knowledge of mathematics that seemed advanced for casual acquaintance. When Nathan returned from a quick grocery run, he found them working together on a science project about electrical circuits, Rachel's explanations both accurate and age-appropriate. The domestic scene felt so natural that he had to remind himself this woman was essentially a stranger who'd brought violence to his doorstep. "You seem to know a lot about electronics," Nathan observed, settling into his favorite chair while Mia colored at the kitchen table. Rachel's hands stilled on the circuit board they'd been assembling, and that familiar calculating look returned to her eyes. She was choosing her words carefully again, weighing truth against deception with the skill of someone accustomed to keeping secrets. The afternoon light streaming through the windows caught the gold in her hair, but shadows lurked beneath her composed exterior. "I work in technology," Rachel said finally, her voice neutral and uninformative. "Software development, mostly." The explanation felt rehearsed, like a cover story she'd used before. Nathan nodded as if satisfied, though his instincts were beginning to whisper warnings. Military training had taught him to recognize when someone was lying, and Rachel's tells were becoming more obvious the longer he watched. The expensive watch, the designer clothes, the way she'd handled Mia's questions about complex engineering concepts, none of it added up to simple software development. Evening brought its own challenges as Nathan struggled to integrate Rachel into bedtime routines that had remained unchanged since Grace's death. Mia insisted that Rachel read her a story, and Nathan found himself hovering in the doorway, watching this stranger navigate the sacred ritual of his daughter's good-night routine. Rachel's voice carried the perfect cadence for storytelling, neither too fast nor too slow, with enough dramatic emphasis to keep Mia engaged without overstimulating her before sleep. The sight stirred memories Nathan had been carefully avoiding for months. Grace had read to Mia every night, her voice weaving magic from simple words until their daughter drifted off to dreams filled with princesses and talking animals. Rachel couldn't replace that tradition, but she was creating something new, something that eased the loneliness that had settled over their house like dust. Nathan retreated to the kitchen, uncomfortable with how right the scene had looked, how easily Rachel had stepped into the void Grace's death had left behind. Later, after Mia had finally succumbed to sleep, Nathan and Rachel sat in the living room, nursing cups of coffee that had long since grown cold. The silence between them felt charged with unspoken questions and carefully guarded secrets. Rachel's eyes kept drifting to Grace's camera, her expression thoughtful in a way that made Nathan wonder what memories she was wrestling with. The house creaked around them with familiar sounds, but underneath the domestic comfort lurked the knowledge that nothing about this situation was normal. "Thank you," Rachel said suddenly, her voice soft enough not to wake Mia upstairs. "For helping me today. For trusting me with your daughter." The gratitude seemed genuine, but Nathan caught undertones of something else. Guilt, perhaps, or regret. She was keeping secrets that weighed on her conscience, and the burden was beginning to show around the edges of her composure. Nathan found himself wanting to ask the questions that had been building all day, but something in her expression warned him off. Whatever truth she was hiding, she wasn't ready to share it yet. The old camera seemed to watch them from its shelf, Grace's presence lingering in the room like a gentle ghost. Nathan had avoided touching it since the funeral, unable to bear the thought of discovering what final images Grace had captured before the accident. But Rachel's presence had stirred something in him, a desire to connect with his wife's memory in a way that didn't hurt quite so much. Maybe it was time to stop treating the camera like a shrine and start honoring what it represented. "Grace always said photography was about capturing moments of truth," Nathan said, following Rachel's gaze to the dusty camera. "She believed you could see people's real selves if you knew how to look." Rachel's expression grew thoughtful, and for a moment her careful composure slipped enough to reveal something vulnerable underneath. Whatever she was running from, it had been chasing her for a long time. The exhaustion in her eyes spoke of months or years spent looking over her shoulder, never quite safe enough to let her guard down completely. Nathan found himself moving towards the camera before he'd consciously decided to do so. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted it from the shelf, feeling the familiar weight of metal and glass that had once been so important to Grace. Rachel watched him with keen interest, her business-trained mind probably cataloguing his emotional responses for future reference. But there was sympathy in her gaze too, the recognition of someone who understood the particular pain of losing something precious and irreplaceable. "It's beautiful," Rachel said, and Nathan could tell she meant it. Film cameras have a warmth that digital can't replicate. Her comment revealed more knowledge than a casual observer should possess, but Nathan was beginning to accept that everything about Rachel ran deeper than surface appearances suggested. She moved closer, examining the camera's mechanisms with the appreciation of someone who understood both the artistry and the engineering involved. Her fingers hovered just above the metal, not quite touching but close enough to feel the weight of memory it carried. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and the shared understanding of loss. Nathan realized he was seeing Rachel clearly for the first time since the morning's chaos, not as a victim or a mystery to be solved, but as a woman carrying her own burdens with quiet dignity. Whatever secrets she harbored, whatever danger she'd brought to his doorstep, she was also someone capable of bringing light back into his daughter's eyes. That had to count for something, even if he couldn't yet understand the full cost of harboring her. 3 days passed in a strange domestic routine that began to feel almost normal. Rachel proved surprisingly adept at household tasks, cooking meals with the casual competence of someone accustomed to taking care of herself. She helped Mia with homework, engaged Nathan in conversations about everything except her mysterious past, and gradually began to relax her constant vigilance. But her phone remained turned off, and she still jumped at unexpected noises. Whatever was hunting her hadn't forgotten her location in small-town Iowa. Nathan found himself looking forward to coming home from his electrical jobs, anticipating Rachel's presence in ways that made him feel guilty and grateful in equal measure. She'd brought warmth back to rooms that had felt cold since Grace's death, filling silence with laughter and conversation. Mia was blooming under the attention, her natural exuberance returning after months of careful behavior around her grieving father. But Nathan's growing feelings were complicated by the knowledge that Rachel was keeping fundamental truths from him. The hardware store owner mentioned seeing Rachel around town, asking casual questions about the newcomer who'd been spotted with Nathan Brooks. Small-town curiosity was predictable, but potentially dangerous if the wrong people came asking the right questions. Nathan found himself creating cover stories without being asked, protecting Rachel's anonymity through lies that came easier than they should have. He was becoming complicit in whatever deception she was maintaining, and the realization troubled him more than he wanted to admit. On Thursday evening, Nathan returned from a service call to find Rachel helping Mrs. Peterson with her electrical outlets, demonstrating knowledge that went far beyond casual familiarity with technology. She was explaining industrial-grade wiring systems with the confidence of someone who'd dealt with similar challenges professionally. Mrs. Peterson listened with the rapt attention she usually reserved for particularly juicy gossip, but her questions revealed growing suspicion about Rachel's claimed background in software development. "That young lady knows more about electrical engineering than most professionals," Mrs. Peterson confided to Nathan while Rachel was inside getting tools. "Makes me wonder what kind of software work she really does." The observation hit closer to truth than Nathan was comfortable with, confirming suspicions that had been growing stronger each day. Rachel's expertise extended into areas that didn't align with her cover story, suggesting a background far more complex than she'd admitted. The question was whether her deceptions were protecting him or putting him in greater danger. That night, after Mia had gone to bed, Nathan found Rachel examining Grace's camera with obvious expertise. She'd opened the back panel and was studying the internal mechanisms with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. The sight should have felt like an invasion of privacy, but instead Nathan felt curious about what she might be able to teach him about his wife's most treasured possession. "The mirror needs adjustment," Rachel said without looking up, her fingers tracing connections with practiced ease. "And there's some corrosion in the battery compartment that's preventing proper meter function." She glanced at Nathan's surprised expression and offered a small smile. "I've always been interested in photography. Film cameras are mechanical marvels when they're working properly." Her explanation felt more honest than most of their conversations, revealing genuine passion beneath her careful composure. Nathan settled beside her on the couch, watching her work with tools she'd somehow produced from her expensive purse. Her touch was gentle but confident, treating the camera with the respect it deserved while making necessary repairs. The domestic intimacy of the moment felt both natural and dangerous, stirring feelings Nathan had been trying to suppress since Grace's death. Rachel wasn't trying to replace his wife's memory, but she was definitely creating new possibilities for connection and healing. "Grace would have liked you," Nathan said quietly, the words escaping before he could stop them. Rachel's hand stilled on the camera, and when she looked at him, her expression held a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. Whatever masks she wore during the day, this moment felt completely genuine, stripped of calculation and pretense. The camera sat between them like a bridge connecting past and future, memory and possibility, in ways that both terrified and thrilled him. "I would have liked her too," Rachel replied, and Nathan believed her completely. The camera clicked softly as she tested the repaired mechanisms, the sound carrying echoes of all the moments Grace had captured during their too brief marriage. But instead of pain, Nathan felt something lighter, gratitude, perhaps, or hope. Rachel was helping him reconnect with joy rather than just managing grief, and the difference felt profound in ways he was only beginning to understand. Friday morning brought the first real test of the fragile equilibrium they'd established. Mia developed a fever during the night, and Nathan faced the familiar panic of single parenthood when his child needed care he couldn't provide during working hours. Rachel stepped into the crisis with natural competence, offering to stay with Mia while Nathan handled his scheduled electrical appointments. The arrangement felt so normal that Nathan forgot to question how a software developer had acquired such obvious experience with childcare. When he returned that afternoon, Nathan found Mia significantly improved and chattering excitedly about the expensive tablet Rachel had somehow procured during his absence. The device was clearly high-end, loaded with educational games and creative applications that had kept his daughter entertained throughout her recovery. But the casualness with which Rachel had made such an expensive purchase raised new questions about her financial resources and decision-making patterns. "You didn't need to spend that kind of money," Nathan said carefully, not wanting to seem ungrateful while expressing concern about Rachel's apparent wealth. The tablet probably cost more than he made in a week, representing the kind of casual expenditure that separated different economic classes. Rachel's gesture was kind, but also highlighted the growing disconnect between her claimed circumstances and her actual behavior patterns. "It wasn't a big deal," Rachel replied, but something in her expression suggested she realized the mistake she'd made. The tablet's packaging bore shipping labels addressed to R. Hartwell, Executive Office, Hartwell Technologies. Details Nathan absorbed with growing unease. The name meant nothing to him immediately, but the corporate address suggested resources far beyond what a software developer should possess. Rachel had made her first serious error in maintaining her cover story. That evening, after Mia had gone to bed clutching her new tablet, Nathan conducted the Google search that would change everything. R. Hartwell Technologies produced results that made his blood run cold with a mixture of shock and betrayal. Rachel Hartwell, 32 years old, CEO of one of America's fastest-growing tech companies. Net worth estimated at $2.8 billion. Recent headlines spoke of mysterious disappearances and corporate intrigue that painted his houseguest in an entirely different light. The woman sleeping in his guest room wasn't a victim of random violence, but one of the most powerful executives in American business. Every conversation they'd shared, every moment of growing intimacy, had been built on fundamental deceptions that called everything into question. Nathan felt the familiar rage that had sustained him through his worst days after Grace's death. But this time it was focused on someone who'd deliberately manipulated his trust and endangered his daughter through calculated lies. Sleep proved impossible as Nathan wrestled with the implications of Rachel's true identity. She'd researched him before their accidental meeting, chosen him as a safe harbor based on profiles that reduced his life to data points and strategic value. The growing feelings he'd developed for her were based on performance rather than authenticity, making him feel foolish and used in ways that cut deeper than simple romantic disappointment. Worse, she'd involved Mia in her deceptions, building relationships with his daughter that served Rachel's needs rather than considering the child's emotional welfare. Morning brought confrontation, as Nathan waited for Mia to leave for school before addressing the lies that had poisoned every interaction since Monday. Rachel emerged from the guest room looking rested and beautiful, her smile fading when she registered his expression. The careful composure she'd maintained for days cracked slightly, revealing calculation and preparation underneath. She'd been expecting this moment, probably planning for it since the tablet delivery had revealed more than she'd intended. "Rachel Hartwell," Nathan said, without preamble, his voice carrying the cold precision he'd learned in military interrogations. "CEO of Hartwell Technologies, net worth $2.8 billion. Recent news suggests you've been missing for several weeks amid reports of corporate espionage and death threats." Each fact fell between them like stones, building a wall of betrayal that couldn't be ignored or explained away. Rachel's face went pale, but she didn't deny the accusations or attempt to maintain her cover story. "You investigated me," she said quietly, and Nathan couldn't tell if she felt hurt or impressed by his initiative. The morning light streaming through the kitchen windows illuminated the expensive details of her appearance that he'd been too trusting to notice earlier. Her watch alone probably cost more than his truck, and her clothes bore designer labels that placed them far outside his economic reality. Everything about her screamed wealth and privilege, making her presence in his modest home feel like elaborate theater. "After you've been lying to me for days," Nathan replied, his anger building as the scope of her deceptions became clear. Was any of it real? The attack, the fear, the gratitude? Or was this all just another business deal for you? The questions poured out of him like poison, each one carrying months of suppressed rage about being used and discarded by people who saw him as expendable. Rachel's face crumpled slightly, but Nathan was beyond caring about her feelings. She'd manipulated his daughter's emotions and his own growing attachment for purposes he couldn't even begin to understand. "No," Elena said fiercely. "It started as guilt, but it became about Lily. About giving her what she needed most in the world. And about giving you what you needed too, the money to save your son's life. I thought I could fix everything with money and good intentions, but I was wrong. I've made everything worse." Lily had stopped crying and was listening to their conversation with the intense focus that sick children developed when adults thought they weren't paying attention. She was putting together pieces of a puzzle that was far too complex for a 6-year-old mind, but she was trying anyway because it was the only way to make sense of the chaos her world had become. "You saved my real daddy?" Lily asked Jack quietly, and he nodded. "But then Mommy killed him." Nathan stepped back, needing distance from her proximity and the confusion it stirred in his chest. "How am I supposed to believe anything you say now? You're a billionaire CEO playing house with a single dad and his kid. What's the end game here, Rachel? What do you really want from us?" The questions hung in the air like accusations, demanding answers she might not be willing to provide. Nathan had learned to recognize lies through bitter experience, and Rachel's explanations felt like damage control rather than honest confession. The sound of vehicles approaching interrupted their confrontation, multiple engines suggesting official business rather than casual visitors. Rachel's face went white with terror that looked completely genuine, her previous composure replaced by the same fear Nathan had witnessed during Monday's attack. Through the front window, he could see black SUVs surrounding his house, men in dark suits emerging with the coordinated precision of law enforcement or military units. Whatever Rachel had been running from had finally caught up with her. "FBI," the first agent announced, displaying credentials that looked authentic to Nathan's untrained eye. "We're looking for Rachel Hartwell in connection with an ongoing investigation into corporate fraud and embezzlement." The words hit Nathan like physical blows, reshaping everything he thought he'd understood about Rachel's situation. She wasn't being hunted by corporate rivals or business enemies, but by federal law enforcement agencies investigating serious crimes. His protective instincts had led him to harbor a fugitive from justice. Rachel's denials sounded hollow in the face of official accusations and documented evidence the agents spread across his kitchen table. Financial records, witness statements, and photographic evidence painted a picture of systematic fraud totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. Her brother Thomas had provided the FBI with detailed testimony about Rachel's alleged crimes, presenting himself as a whistleblower trying to save the family company from his sister's corruption. The case against her looked overwhelming from Nathan's perspective. "Mr. Brooks," the lead agent said with professional courtesy, "we understand Ms. Hartwell has been staying in your home. We need to ask if she's made any statements about her business activities or expressed intentions to flee the country. Nathan found himself in the impossible position of choosing between cooperation with law enforcement and loyalty to someone who'd systematically lied to him for days. Rachel watched him with desperate eyes, silently pleading for protection he was no longer sure she deserved. Neighbors gathered on porches and sidewalks, their curiosity mingling with judgment as federal agents transformed Nathan's quiet street into a crime scene. Mrs. Peterson stood in her doorway with obvious satisfaction, vindicated in her suspicions about the mysterious woman who'd been staying with Nathan Brooks. The small-town rumor mill would process this development for months, turning Nathan into either a victim or an accomplice depending on how events unfolded. His reputation and Mia's future were now hostage to decisions he'd made with incomplete information. The agents allowed Nathan to collect Mia from school before their investigation continued, sparing his daughter the trauma of seeing her father's house treated as a potential crime scene. But Mia's questions proved harder to answer than official inquiries, her 7-year-old logic struggling to understand why the kind woman who'd read her stories was now being accused of terrible crimes. Nathan had no answers that wouldn't shatter his daughter's trust in adult reliability, so he offered comfort instead of explanations. That afternoon, as Rachel was led away in handcuffs, she caught Nathan's eye one final time. Her expression held regret, and something that might have been love, but also acceptance of consequences she'd apparently been expecting for months. "Take care of yourself," she mouthed silently, and Nathan realized she was more concerned about his welfare than her own legal troubles. The gesture felt genuine in ways that made her earlier deceptions even more painful to contemplate. The house felt empty after the FBI concluded their search, taking computers and documents Nathan hadn't even known existed. Rachel had been more careful about covering her tracks than he'd realized, but investigators had still found evidence of communications and financial transactions that supported their case against her. Nathan sat in his living room, surrounded by the detritus of official investigation, trying to process how completely he'd misjudged someone he'd been falling in love with. Mia's tears proved harder to handle than his own emotional turmoil. She'd grown attached to Rachel with the fierce intensity of childhood affection, and losing another mother figure so soon after Grace's death felt cruel beyond measure. Nathan held his daughter while she cried, promising that they'd be okay while privately wondering if he'd ever be able to trust his judgment again. Rachel had seemed so genuine, so caring toward Mia, so perfectly suited to fill the void Grace's death had left in their lives. News coverage of Rachel's arrest dominated local television and social media, turning Nathan into an unwilling celebrity as reporters sought interviews about his relationship with the accused billionaire. The attention felt invasive and humiliating, reducing his private struggles to entertainment for strangers who couldn't understand the complexity of emotions involved. He declined all interview requests and tried to shield Mia from the worst of the publicity, but small-town life offered few places to hide from unwanted attention. Sleep brought no relief from questions that multiplied faster than Nathan could process them. Had Rachel manipulated his feelings from the beginning, or had genuine emotion developed alongside calculated deception? Was her kindness toward Mia authentic, or just another tool in whatever game she'd been playing? The uncertainty felt worse than the betrayal itself, leaving Nathan unable to trust his own memories of their time together. Every shared moment now carried the possibility of hidden meaning and ulterior motives. Work provided temporary escape from emotional chaos, but Nathan's clients had questions he couldn't answer satisfactorily. The electrical jobs that usually brought satisfaction felt mechanical and pointless, his mind constantly returning to Rachel's situation and his own role in harboring a fugitive. Colleagues offered support mixed with curiosity, their attempts at comfort revealing how thoroughly the scandal had penetrated his professional reputation. He'd become the man who'd been fooled by a criminal. A cautionary tale about trusting strangers with expensive watches. 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal consultations and media attention that gradually faded as other scandals captured public interest. Nathan learned to navigate the complicated emotions of missing someone who'd betrayed his trust, recognizing that his feelings for Rachel hadn't disappeared despite overwhelming evidence of her deceptions. Mia asked daily when Rachel would come back, unable to understand why adults made promises they couldn't keep. Nathan had no answers that wouldn't damage his daughter's faith in human reliability even further. The first sign that everything might not be as it seemed came through a phone call that shattered Nathan's Wednesday morning routine. "Mr. Brooks, this is Agent Martinez with the FBI. We need you to come to our field office immediately. There's been a development in the Rachel Hartwell case." The agent's tone carried urgency that suggested more than routine updates, and Nathan felt his carefully constructed equilibrium beginning to crack. Whatever new information they'd discovered was significant enough to require his immediate presence. The federal building felt intimidating in ways that reminded Nathan of military briefings where bad news was delivered with official efficiency. Agent Martinez looked exhausted, her professional composure strained by whatever revelations had prompted this meeting. Documents covered the conference room table in organized chaos that spoke of intensive investigation and significant discoveries. Nathan's stomach clenched with the premonition that everything was about to change again, possibly in ways that would make recent events seem simple by comparison. "We've arrested Thomas Hartwell." Agent Martinez began without preamble, her voice carrying the weight of revelations that would reshape the entire case. Rachel's brother has been systematically embezzling from Hartwell Technologies for the past 3 years, using his sister's identity and access codes to cover his tracks. The evidence we thought implicated Rachel was actually documentation of Thomas's crimes, carefully manipulated to frame her for his actions. Each word fell like stones, building a mountain of proof that Nathan's instincts about Rachel might have been correct after all. The true scope of Thomas's conspiracy became clear as agents explained their findings. He'd orchestrated the kidnapping attempts to eliminate Rachel before she could discover his embezzlement, hiring professional criminals to make her disappearance look like corporate espionage gone wrong. When that failed, he'd turned to law enforcement, providing fabricated evidence that would remove Rachel from the company and clear his path to complete control. The brother Rachel had trusted with her life had been systematically destroying her reputation while stealing her fortune. 20 minutes later, Jake watched Rebecca's car pull into the park's parking lot with the careful precision of someone who was barely holding themselves together. She emerged looking like she'd aged years in the 2 weeks since their confrontation, her usual polished appearance replaced by the kind of exhausted dishevelment that came from sleepless nights and constant worry. Maya ran to her immediately, and Jake watched Rebecca hold her daughter with the fierce desperation of someone who'd thought they might never get the chance again. When she finally looked up at Jake over Maya's head, her eyes were red-rimmed but grateful. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Jake nodded, then gently guided Sophie towards the playground, where Ethan was already climbing the monkey bars with the determined focus of a boy trying to work off nervous energy. "Why don't you kids play for a while? Rebecca and I need to talk." As the children scattered toward the playground equipment, Jake and Rebecca found themselves alone on a bench, the same one where they'd sat just weeks ago when everything had seemed simpler. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass, and Jake could smell autumn in the air, that subtle shift that meant change was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. "I'm sorry about Maya," Rebecca said quietly. "She's been difficult since I told them we wouldn't be seeing you anymore. She keeps asking questions I don't know how to answer." "What did you tell them?" Rebecca's smile was rueful. That sometimes adults make mistakes that hurt the people they care about, and sometimes the only way to fix those mistakes is to step away before you make things worse. And Maya didn't buy it. Maya told me that stepping away isn't fixing anything, it's just running away. Rebecca glanced toward the playground where her daughter was helping Sophie navigate the climbing wall. 12 years old, and she's already wiser than I am. Jake followed her gaze, watching their children play together with the easy acceptance that adults seemed to lose somewhere along the way. She's right, you know. We are running away. I hurt you. Rebecca said simply. I hurt Sophie. How is staying in your life anything but selfish? Maybe it is selfish, Jake admitted, but maybe that's okay. Maybe sometimes the selfish choice and the right choice are the same thing. Rebecca turned to look at him, surprise flickering in her tired eyes. What are you saying? Jake was quiet for a moment, watching Ethan teach Sophie how to pump her legs on the swing, his patience and gentleness with her a testament to the kind of mother who'd raised him. I'm saying that I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to hate you for what you did, and I can't. Jake, I'm not done. His voice was gentle but firm. I can't hate you because every time I try, I remember how you helped Sophie down that slide, how you cleaned up Ethan's milkshake without missing a beat, how you made my daughter laugh in a way I hadn't heard in months. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't interrupt. I can't hate you because I understand why you did what you did. You panicked, you made a mistake, and then you spent 2 years trying to fix it in the only way you knew how. Jake paused, gathering his thoughts. I can't hate you because I think I might be falling in love with you. Both versions of you. The woman who saved my family and the one who almost destroyed it. The words hung between them like a bridge that neither of them was sure they were brave enough to cross. Rebecca was crying openly now, not the controlled tears of someone trying to maintain dignity, but the raw, ugly sobs of someone who'd been holding back emotion for too long. I love you too, she whispered. I know I have no right to. I know it's complicated and messy and probably impossible, but I do. I love how you put Sophie first in everything. I love how you make the best of whatever situation you're in. I love how you look at the world like it's basically good, even after everything you've been through. Jake reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with her soft ones. So what do we do now? I don't know, Rebecca admitted. I've never been in a situation like this before. I don't know how you build something real on a foundation of mistakes and secrets. Maybe the same way you build anything worthwhile, Jake suggested. One day at a time, with honesty and patience and the willingness to forgive each other when we mess up. From the playground came the sound of children's laughter, Sophie shrieking with delight as Ethan pushed her swing higher, Maya calling out encouragement from the top of the slide. It was the sound of innocence and joy, of connections that formed naturally and without agenda. They need each other, Rebecca observed, watching their children play. Yeah, Jake agreed. And maybe we do too. Rebecca squeezed his hand, and for the first time in weeks, Jake felt the tight knot of anger and hurt in his chest begin to loosen. It wasn't forgiveness yet. That would take time and work, and probably more difficult conversations than either of them wanted to have. But it was the beginning of something, a tentative first step toward the possibility that love might be stronger than the mistakes that had brought them together. As the sun began to set over the park, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, Jake found himself thinking about second chances and the strange ways that life could circle back on itself. 2 years ago, Rebecca had been a stranger who'd changed his life without really seeing him. Now she was a woman who saw him clearly, his strengths and flaws, his fears and hopes, and chose to love him anyway. It wasn't the fairy tale beginning that either of them might have wanted, but maybe it was something better, a real beginning, built on truth and forgiveness, and the radical idea that people could change, could grow, could become better versions of themselves if they were brave enough to try. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain but full of possibility. And for the first time since Rebecca had walked into his garage with tears in her eyes, Jake found himself looking forward to finding out what came next. The watercolor box that had started everything sat in a place of honor on the windowsill, its worn wood and paint-stained compartments serving as a bridge between past and present. Tom had finally opened it completely, discovering not just Anna's paints, but also letters she'd written to Grace for future birthdays, photographs of their early days together, and a note addressed to whoever helps Tom learn to love again, that had made him cry for an hour when he'd found it. Anna's presence in their new life wasn't intrusive or competitive, it was foundational, the bedrock upon which they'd built something beautiful and sustainable. On quiet evenings when Grace was asleep, and the house felt full rather than empty, Tom and Maggie would sit together, planning lessons for their shared classes or reviewing applications from families who needed the kind of help Tom had been too proud to ask for 18 months earlier. Sometimes they talked about Anna, sharing memories that kept her alive in their conversations without making her a ghost that haunted their happiness. Sometimes they planned their own future, discussing the possibility of marriage with the careful attention of people who understood that love was both precious and fragile, deserving of patience and intention. The biggest surprise had been how naturally they'd all fit together, how easily their individual lives had merged into something that felt both inevitable and miraculous. Tom's art had returned with a vengeance, informed now by loss and recovery in ways that made his teaching more effective and his personal work more meaningful. Maggie had found in their family the sense of purpose that had been missing from her charity work, the feeling that her efforts were personal rather than professional. And Grace had blossomed under the attention of two adults who loved her unconditionally, while also loving each other in ways that made their household feel secure rather than fragile. On the anniversary of Anna's death, the three of them visited her grave together, bringing flowers and new paintings and stories about how their family had grown in ways Anna would have approved of. Tom no longer felt guilty about his happiness, understanding finally that Anna's love had been generous enough to encompass his future as well as their past. Grace chattered to her mother's headstone about school and art and the new baby ducks at the park, treating death as a change in location rather than an ending of relationship. As they walked back to the car, Grace skipping ahead while Tom and Maggie followed hand in hand, Tom realized that Anna had given them the most precious gift imaginable: the courage to love again without reservation, the wisdom to build new happiness without destroying old memories, and the understanding that families could expand and evolve without losing their essential character. The emergency room where they'd first met felt like a lifetime ago, but Tom could still remember the exact moment when Maggie had recognized Anna's paint box and spoken his wife's name with the familiarity of someone who had earned the right to remember her out loud. In the growing dusk of a Millbrook evening, walking toward a future that held promise instead of just survival, Tom understood that some stories don't end with loss, but begin with it, using grief as a foundation for joy that runs deeper because it acknowledges the cost of loving fully. Grace's laughter echoed off the cemetery walls like music, and Maggie's hand in his felt like coming home to a place he'd never known existed. Anna's gift to them hadn't been a replacement for what they'd lost, but an expansion of what they'd thought possible. Love that multiplied instead of diminished, hope that grew stronger because it had been tested by the worst life could offer. The paint box sat safely in Grace's backpack, no longer a relic of the past, but a tool for creating futures Anna could only have dreamed of, colors mixed with intention and applied with the confidence that comes from understanding that beauty is not diminished by sadness but made more precious because of it. The last visitors departed as darkness settled over the city, leaving the gallery space peaceful and warm in the glow of carefully positioned lighting that accommodated various sensory processing needs. Ruby had fallen asleep curled up next to her latest color study, while Jasper continued working on mathematical calculations for their next collaborative project. Zoe was reading quietly in a corner, occasionally looking up to observe the comfortable domesticity of their unconventional family gathering. Helena began the gentle process of transitioning the children toward home and bedtime routines, her movements carrying the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to create structure without rigidity, accommodation without chaos. Benjamin gathered art supplies and turned off equipment, his hands moving through familiar patterns that had become meditative rather than merely functional. As they prepared to leave the gallery space that had become the visible symbol of their commitment to honoring neurodivergent gifts, Benjamin paused to look once more at the children's collaborative installation. The piece seemed to pulse with its own internal light, geometric patterns and flowing colors, creating a visual representation of minds working together in harmony rather than competition. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: funding applications and research collaborations, therapeutic sessions with children whose gifts hadn't yet been recognized, conversations with educators and parents who were beginning to understand that different didn't necessarily mean deficient. But tonight, surrounded by the quiet evidence of healing and creativity and love that had emerged from their willingness to risk authentic connection, Benjamin Mitchell felt the deep satisfaction of someone who'd finally learned to stop hiding from his own gifts and the people who needed them most. The drive home through the quiet city streets was filled with the comfortable silence of a family that had learned to communicate through presence as much as words, their different ways of processing and expressing emotion woven together into something resilient and beautiful and entirely their own. And in the peaceful breathing of children who finally felt safe enough to sleep deeply, Benjamin could hear the echo of Luna's voice, reminding him that the most important art was always the kind that helped other people remember they weren't alone in the world.